In this chapter, we're going to dive into the real deal. I've brought in those references we analyzed earlier. Let me sort them into their categories. Before we get started, I'd like to make something clear. After we wrapped up the last section, I went over the analysis we did and made a few tweaks. Firstly, I cleaned up the lines to make them clearer. And secondly, on this front view picture, I found out more to mark. Like the structure of the front leg. You can see this isn't just a simple outline. There are some more complex structures in the middle. Also, I marked out the structure on the other front leg, as well as this hind leg. Note that the silhouette of this hind leg is clearly visible, so it's valuable for reference. Except for what we did earlier, I did a more detailed analysis on it using the same method I introduced, sketching out the turning points and then connecting the lines. Apart from this picture, the other references are the same as what we analyzed in the previous episode. Alright, let's move each of these references into their respective categories. In order to observe them conveniently later, just place them next to the main reference correspondingly. Enlarge this one a little bit. Okay, launch Blender. First, let's adjust the layout. We need to make sure the references are well positioned, so we can see them at all times while working. Let me put them on the right. If you have two screens, it's a good idea to put the references on the other one. Here, for the sake of showing you my operations, I'll put it on the side. Let me adjust the layout a bit more. Alright, next up, we're going to work on creating a base shape from a base geometry. I like to call this approach geometric thinking. Every complex creature actually has a very simple underlying logic. Before we start creating, we need to learn to observe it with this holistic mindset so that we won't be intimidated by those complex structures and have no idea where to start. As we analyzed the references earlier, we mentioned a principle. From rough shape to details step by step, we'll follow the same approach while creating. Instead of directly diving into making each part very detailed, we'll start by creating the big shape. When analyzing the references, we also started from the big picture and then gradually refined and added details. It's the same when we work on modeling. At the beginning, we start by creating its primary structure and then tweak and refine the structure step by step until we get everything looking just right. Before we dive into the actual modeling, I'd like to walk you through a couple of Blender settings that might come in handy and help you understand my setup better. Let me enable the screencast keys first, and then open the settings panel. The first thing I want to talk about is autosave. It's common for software to crash or unexpectedly close during the modeling process, which can result in damaged or missing files. To ensure a more reliable modeling process, we need to check if autosave is enabled. The timer represents the interval of autosave, meaning the number of minutes between each save. Save versions determines how many versions are saved. In file paths, there is temporary files, which indicates the path where autosave files are stored. By default, Blender doesn't have this setting specified, so we need to select a path by ourselves. I've already set it up. It's essential to ensure these settings are correctly configured, so as to prevent any damage to the project file in case of software crashes. Next is Orbit method. Select navigation. Blender provides two orbit methods, turntable and trackball. The second one will be involved in our ladder procedures. Trackball allows us to tumble our view in any angle, while turntable keeps the z-axis upright. Each method has its own advantages. In early stages of production, we usually focus on the overall shape and ensure that the proportions between all parts are correct, so a level perspective is better. Later, when detailing the structure, we can switch to trackball mode. For now, we keep turntable. Select Input and find Tablet API there. By default, it's automatic. I prefer to set it to Windows Ink. I found that automatic mode may cause jittering when we use a tablet pen. If you also encounter this issue, you can choose Windows Ink to resolve it. I just keep it as Windows Ink for smooth sculpting. That's all for Blender's settings. Except for those mentioned above, everything else remains the default. Alright, let's switch to Sculpt Layout. During sculpting, switching brushes can be frequent, and it can be time-consuming to manually select them each time. To speed up our sculpting process, we can use the hotkey Shift plus Spacebar to show the brush list and switch brushes quickly. Now, let's delve into this shortcut a bit further. We'll open the Preferences and then select the Key Map section. We can see 3 spacebar actions: Play, Tools, and Search. By default, it's set to play, meaning when you press the spacebar, the current animation will play. Therefore, to display the brush list, we need to hold Shift and press spacebar. Alternatively, you can set the spacebar action to Tools. This way, you'll only need to press the spacebar to show the list. If you set it to Search, pressing the spacebar won't show the brush list. So, if you encounter any issue concerning the brush list, remember to double-check the settings here. For now, let's leave it as is. Cool. Another way to quickly access the brush list is by using Quick Favorites. Simply right-click on a brush and select Add to Quick Favorites. After that, you can simply press Q. The brushes you just added will appear. See, easy but handy. You can add more brushes into the Quick Favorites as needed. All the brushes we've added are here. Feel free to add whatever you need. Quick Favorites isn't just for brushes. You can add all sorts of components here. Just right-click on anything and select Add to Quick Favorites, and it just works. Also, you can add any specific button or parameter to the list. Simply right-click to add it. Pretty handy, isn't it? Alright, let's save the project file. A clear and organized naming convention often helps our project progress smoothly. For example, the name of the project plus the creation date. Alright, let's dive into the real work now. Remove unwanted items and adjust our work layout. Alright, let's move the references aside so we can easily see them. The first step in modeling is getting the big shape done, just like this picture we analyzed earlier. Based on our analysis, we're gonna sculpt out a big shape. We start by creating a new sphere. That's where we'll kick things off. Enter Sculpt Mode. And let's remesh the sphere to even out the mesh. Toggle on X Symmetry. This part here is gonna be the wolf's chest cavity, so I'll trim off the anterior part and posterior part to match that shape. The Line Project tool here is just perfect for this job. Note that its lowest part is in the middle of the chest cavity, over here. Smooth this area a bit. This is the front part of the chest cavity. Let's just roughly bring the shape out, because our main focus at the moment is to outline its overall form. Let's take a moment to see if the current shape looks right. I think the front upper part should be a bit higher. Well, it's good enough for this stage. Next, let's move on to the belly. Since it's small, I'm planning to pull it out from this cavity. Create a mask based on the shape of the belly. And then press Ctrl+I to invert the mask. Now, use Grab Brush to pull the belly out. This way, we won't mess up the chest cavity shape we just created. You may notice that the mesh density here is a bit low. Let's redistribute the mesh of the belly with Remesh. Instead of clicking the remesh button, we can also use the keyboard shortcut Ctrl+R, which is very convenient and fast. This is a new technique that we haven't mentioned before, and I'll share more of these in the upcoming steps. Okay, done with the belly. Next, we're gonna work on the waist part. Switch to object mode. Start off with a cube and place it over here. Later, we'll turn on symmetry. For now, it's fine to just focus on one side. Remesh it. In panel, here is symmetry. Simply click Symmetrize to mirror the other side. Smooth it out a bit. Switch to Inflate Brush to inflate and soften this hard edge. Use Grab Brush to bring the rough shape out. In this stage, we didn't work much on the proportion or the shape, since it's too rough to adjust them correctly. Instead, we will do the job after finishing this big shape. Nice. It's okay for now. Then, let's move on to the posterior part. The pelvis connects the hind legs to the body. Let's first roughly shape the pelvis with a trapezoid. Then, move on to the hind leg. Create a sphere, place it over here. Switch to sculpt mode, then remesh it. We first drag it to fit its own rough shape. Cut its top and bottom with Line Project tool. Roughly adjust its shape again. There is a mistake. The pelvis isn't correct. It should be a slope. Alright, let's continue to tweak the thigh. Now, we just work on the rough shape, so no need to go hard on it. Let's mirror it. Add a mirror modifier. There's something wrong. Its location is shifted a bit. Press Ctrl+A to apply transforms. Perfect. Now, let's work on the forelimb shoulder. First, create a cube to show its rough shape. Insert a loop cut. The scapula is not directed toward the very left, so let's rotate it. Okay, just keep it like this. Add a mirror modifier. The same operation as before. Next, let's focus on this part of the forelimb and also the calf. First off, for the forelimb, we grab a UV sphere, scale it down. and then squish it to make it thinner. Jump into sculpt mode and remesh it. Roughly adjust its shape. We use Line Project to cut the top and bottom. Finally, we just drag it around until we've got the shape we want. Easy peasy. We need to take a look from multiple angles to make sure everything looks right. Adjust it to this effect for now. Moving on to the calf of the hind leg. Right now, this part of the hind leg seems a bit too bulky, so we need to make some adjustments. Let's set the location of 3D cursor at this point here. Set transform pivot point to 3D cursor and scale them down a bit. Grab another sphere and jump into sculpt mode. Remesh it. We just adjusted its scale a moment ago. You can see the values right here. When we switch to sculpt mode, the brush is also scaled. To fix that, let's apply the scale before we start sculpting. Now, the brush should work properly. Next up, let's do the same thing. Drag it to shape it. Give it a little squeeze. Then, move it to the right position and rotate it. Trim off the top and bottom, and then tweak the overall shape. We can now refer to the previous analysis on body proportions. At this point, our goal is to ensure that the big shape is well structured, so focusing on the overall shape is sufficient. Note that spending too much time on details can distract us from getting the big picture right, and may lead to an improper overall shape. Alright, let's move on to creating the lower part of the front leg. Grab a sphere just like before. Enter sculpt mode and remesh it. Then, use the Line Project tool to cut off the top and bottom. Now, we use Grab Brush to shape it. Okay, it should connect well to the front shoulder. Nice. Add a mirror modifier for them. And this part. Great. Let's apply all of the mirror modifiers. We can just keep X-symmetry, since it's convenient to sculpt and observe both sides quickly. Now, let's move on to the ankle parts. Create a sphere. Enter sculpt mode and bring out its form. remesh it. To mirror it, we can also use Symmetrize here. But before that, don't forget to apply its location. Switch to Object Mode and apply Location. And then switch to Sculpt Mode, Symmetrize it. Because it's X, here, select plus X to X. Perfect. Let's move on to the hind legs. Grab a cube. Then add a mirror modifier and apply it. Oops, I forgot to turn on symmetry for the ankle. Let me fix it. The overall proportion is off. The trunk is fat, yet limbs are small. Let's first finish the basic shape, and then we'll adjust the proportions. Alright, next up are paws. Grab a cube. Duplicate one for rear paws. The front lower leg isn't long enough. Let's extend it to a proper length. Mirror. Good. Now, we have finished the basic shape, and we're gonna adjust the overall proportion. But before that, we'd better combine these individuals in order to adjust them holistically. Ctrl+J to combine them. Don't forget to apply all mirror modifiers, otherwise they won't work. Enter Sculpt Mode. See, the entire body becomes an integrated unit, and if we move any part of it, we move them all. In the previous episode, we mentioned a bit about Auto Mask tool. Here we're gonna apply it. Hold Alt+A to display the Auto Mask menu. Select Topology. Now, these objects are behaving as if they are not combined. You can also use By Loose Parts from Initialize Face Sets. It separates face sets based on connected mesh. Okay, let's adjust the proportions based on our analysis. First, let's compare the length of the chest and the legs. The chest part, from the front legs to the hind legs, is approximately 1 ankle's length longer than the front shoulders. But now, the length of the chest is much longer than the front shoulder. So, let's fix this issue. The front shoulder is too small. In the length of the parts of hind legs, the proportion seems incorrect and we need to modify it. Next, let's compare the length of the front shoulder and the upper front leg. The length is close, just about half an ankle's length shorter. So, we extend the upper front leg a bit. That looks right. For the ankle part, let's keep the current length for now. Well, I forgot to mirror the front paws. Let me fix it. Alright, looks good. Let's adjust the hind legs now. The length of this part of the hind leg here is actually close to the upper part here, just slightly shorter. Let's make a bit of adjustment. Great. Now, let's adjust the ankle part. The width of the chest part needs to be a bit narrower. The proportions are almost there. Next, let's adjust the pose. The front and hind legs are currently quite straight, which looks awkward. Let's find a reference to the front view and adjust the pose accordingly. Turn off Auto Mask and make some overall adjustments. Also, we turn off symmetry so we work on just one side. Now, let's move and rotate the front paws outward a bit for a better stance. Alright, let's mirror that. The front leg stance is looking good now. Next up, let's tweak the hind legs. Straight up and down looks weird, so let's give them a bit of adjustment. Let's also angle the paws outward a bit to make it look more natural. Perfect, let's mirror again. The knees are too close. Let's adjust them a bit more. Turn on X symmetry. Good. Proportions and pose are looking good for now. Alright, time to work on the remaining parts, the neck and head. Go back to Object Mode and create a sphere. Based on our reference, the head is raised up, but we need to start with a basic pose for later rigging, hair creation, and other stuff. So, we're going to go for a neutral pose, like a T-pose when we're making human characters, not a sitting or walking one, which can mess with later steps. So, what we need is a reference of the wolf looking at eye level. If we can't find one, we might need to edit it, rotate this part to make it work. Let's turn on symmetry and start shaping its neck. Meanwhile, we'll make sure it's of the right size. Its length is approximately the same as the front shoulder. Try to make it accurate. Use Line Project tool to cut off the front part and rear part and remesh it. Make sure the root of the neck is connected to the chest cavity well, and maintain the right length. Alright, that's it for the neck. Next, let's move on to the head. In this stage, a simple shape is fine to represent the head, such as a cube. Edit it a bit to become a trapezoidal prism. The length of the head is the same as the neck. That's it. Next is the tail. Simply grab a cylinder and adjust its length. Alright, all parts are now built. Let's combine these objects together. Before making any further edits, let's move it to ensure it's standing on the ground. Select a point on the bottom of the foot, then position the cursor at that point. Select Object from the menu, then Set Origin, then Origin to 3D Cursor. Set the location along the Z-axis to 0, so its bottom is above the ground. Let's check the size. According to our research, the shoulder height of a wolf is typically between 60 to 85 centimeters, which corresponds to the height along the Z-axis. Too large now, let's scale it down to get the right size. Now, a bit of the head's height is actually included, so just adjust it to 87 centimeters for now. The body length of a real wolf is between 110 centimeters and 150 centimeters, so the current size is basically in line. Apply all transforms. Oops, I forgot to move it to the world center. Apply location again. Okay, let's tweak the shape further. From the current result, the overall proportions look good, but we just need to double check. It looks like the hind legs need a bit more adjustment, a little fat. Then the calves. Currently, the symmetry is a bit off. Let's symmetrize it. There seems to be an issue with the symmetry. Let's check it out. Oh, it isn't at the world center. Okay, let's fix it. Find a point in the middle and move the cursor to this point. Then set the origin of this mesh to 3D cursor. Then set the location along the x-axis to 0 and apply it. Symmetrize again. Good. Now symmetry works well. Let's check the proportions from the top view. Find out the reference of the top view first. Here's a note. You can see that the waist should be a bit thinner than the chest. And all the legs should also be slimmer. Let's narrow them down a bit. Turn off Auto Mask and make some further adjustments. While adjusting, we can zoom out to observe the overall shape better. We can always toggle Auto Mask on and off as needed, which gives us more flexibility and control. So far, I've been repeatedly modifying the proportions without going into more detailed operations. This is because getting the proportions right at this stage will make the later stages smoother. Alright, at this stage, we've reached a good point in terms of proportions. Next, we'll merge these objects into one, and then use remeshing to connect them together for more detailed structural refinement. In the following chapters, there won't be much explanation, as most of the time will be spent on gradually refining the structure and finally shaping a realistic model. Alright, that's all for this episode.